It's clear now what the Israelis are doing, and it's criminal, it's brutal, it's vicious, it's immoral, it's inhuman. And for the Israelis, they don't care. The majority of Israeli population supports the Gaza war. So this is the dilemma. How do you move forward to a resolution of the conflict, possibly, that has to deal with the reality that the majority of Israelis are now warmongers, and they support the zombie killing machine that Israel has become. Well, it's not exactly clear how the impact will happen, but it is clear that something historic happened in January and February of this year during the primary elections, when large numbers of voters, many were Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, Black Americans, Hispanic, labor unions, progressive Jews, a whole variety of different people, but spearheaded by the Arab and Muslim American community in Michigan, basically got fed up with the Democratic Party, taking them for granted, and at the same time running a genocide in Gaza and West Bank that was killing and impacting many of the families of the American citizens in Michigan and elsewhere. So they started what they call the uncommitted movement. So these people told the Biden administration, we're going to vote uncommitted in the primary election. We're not going to vote Republican or Democrat. We say uncommitted, meaning we can go either way. And they say this is a message to you that if you don't change, if you, the Biden administration, don't change your policy of supporting the genocide in Gaza by Israel, we're going to vote for somebody else or not vote at all. And this could possibly cause the Democratic candidates in November to lose. I say possibly because we don't know how many of the uncommitted movement, which was had grown to hundreds of thousands of citizens in about 7 or 8 states, and especially what's called the swing states, which could push the election to either party: Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, and a couple others. So potentially, if the Biden administration, which will be essentially the Harris administration after the formal nomination to her candidacy for the presidency at the Michigan Democratic and the Chicago Democratic Convention in about 2 weeks, when she's the formal candidate, essentially she'll be head of the Democratic Party. And if she doesn't differentiate herself from the Biden policies, the likelihood is that hundreds of thousands of voters will not vote for her, despite some of the nice things she said and some of the suggestions she's made and the shift in tone where she's more insisting on a ceasefire. I've talked to some of the people involved in the uncommitted movement in Michigan, and they've said very clearly, we're not going to put up with just words and gestures and symbols. We want real policy. This genocide, and it's our tax money as American citizens, and our families and friends are being massacred over there. We won't put up with it anymore. So this is a fascinating moment, because what it tells us is that the Palestine issue has actually become a domestic American political issue that might even impact the presidential election. There's been a really serious shift that's taken place in the last couple of years in the American political system vis-a-vis Israel. The Republicans have been taken over by Trump, and Trump was very friendly to Israel. He did everything that it wanted, recognized the Golan annexation, the East Jerusalem annexation, did the Abraham Accords, and all kinds of things that Israel wanted, which most of the Arab world rejected. And this was the really turning point, I think, when the Republicans, also working closely with evangelical Christians in the United States, made the Republican Party a radically pro-Israeli movement, supporting the settlers, supporting the genocide, trying to silence Palestinian voices, making it a criminal offense to wear a keffiyeh or to use the word intifada, really crazy stuff. But this is American politics, which has crazy elements in it. So the Republicans now are, and they just invited Netanyahu to speak in the U.S. Congress, where he made an outrageously inaccurate speech full of lies and exaggerations. But this is how politics works. It's emotionalism, it's symbolism, it's playing on people's fears, and the Israelis are very good at doing that. And they've now put the Republican Party in the position of really being the premier advocate of radical Zionist, Israeli, extremist, racist, apartheid, genocidal policies, which is pretty unusual. But this is how politics works. You get support from people who you think will help you win elections and stay in power. And it's an open system. Anybody can play the game. The Israelis have played it well. They had the whole Democratic Party on their side, even in their pocket for many decades. More and more Democrats started to become aware of Israel's criminal genocidal activities and have started opposing it to the point where I think around 130 or 140 people stayed out of the congressional speech by Netanyahu, most of them Democrats. And polling shows that the Democratic Party, especially young Democrats, especially young Jews, are very critical of the U.S. policy supporting the genocide by Israel in Gaza. And therefore, this created an opening which the Republican Party has taken advantage of and adopted very hardline positions that are parallel with what Israel wants, the right wing in Israel, the fascist genocidal apartheid right wing, led by Netanyahu and his colleagues. And they are going to keep making wild, extreme statements of support for Israel, that it can defend itself, it can do anything it needs, we have to support it as needed to kill the terrorists and to stop what Netanyahu described as the biggest threat, which is Iranian aims to control the whole Middle East and even control the world. I mean, this is theatrical movie land stuff, but this is what American politics does. It's an emotional-driven, entertainment-driven, commercial, money-driven process. And Trump, with the Republicans now, is in this position where they make extreme statements. They get support from Republicans, but not all Republicans. And they're losing a lot of support from people in the middle, or Democrats or progressives. So it's a losing strategy in the long run. But politicians don't think in the long run. They only think of the next election, getting funding, getting voting, getting support, mobilizing the media. And this is where we are now. The progressive wing of the Democratic Party has grown stronger in many areas. And also progressives who are not necessarily with the Democrats, there may be independents or with other movements, have grown stronger. And what's happened is that the Democrats have been able to slowly bring together a lot of different groups of people throughout the United States who share some or all of the positions of the Democratic Party on social justice issues, climate change, gender equality, racial equality, all of these critical issues, economic issues, things that matter to American families. But the Palestine question is unique. The Palestine question is a foreign policy issue. It doesn't impact most American families, impacts some Arab and Muslim Americans. It doesn't impact most American families. But because it's become such a huge global moral issue and spread to college campuses all over the United States, we've seen many groups of people who we would call progressive Americans, some Democrats, some independents, even some Republicans. They've basically come together and taken some actions on Palestine. What's not clear is whether their anger at the Biden policies of supporting the Israeli genocide, whether that anger will continue to be strong in early November when it comes time to vote, or if it's not strong then, it might allow a lot of people who have been critical of Biden to vote for Kamala Harris. This is the big unknown, and it's really dependent on how she tries to differentiate herself from Biden. She can't do that very much now because she's still vice president and he's still president, even though she has enough votes in the Democratic convention to get the nomination in or August 22, I think. But she can't take a sharply different position than Biden now because he is still president. And he wants to make Gaza, through a ceasefire, he wants to make Gaza a positive part of his legacy. Right now, it's a very negative part of his legacy. People often call him Genocide Joe, which is an accurate word to use. But we have to wait. We have to wait for another 2.5 weeks, because after she's nominated, Kamala Harris can then indicate through words and statements and through some practical political mobilization activities whether she really wants to differentiate herself from Genocide Joe and the existing American support for Israel's policies. There's many ways that she can do that. And if there are any hints that are going to come soon, they're going to come in the platform of the Democratic Party in Chicago, which should come out in the next 10 days or so. The platform is what the party stands for, and it's one way that she can indicate where she is, because she will be more impactful on shaping that platform than Biden will, because he's on his way out, she's on her way in if she wins, but she's certainly going to be the candidate. Therefore, she can influence the platform, and she might be able to then put in strong statements on things like, we must enforce a full weapons embargo on Israel because it is carrying out genocidal actions according to the International Court of Justice, and we are obligated morally and politically and legally to do what we can to stop a genocide from happening. Also, the U.S. might, the Democratic Party might say the U.S. should stop or suspend some of its own weapons shipments to Israel, because American law requires that any weapons sent to foreign countries not be used in a way that goes against international human rights and crimes of war crimes actions. So there are ways that she can indicate where she is without yet being in charge of making policy. And it's very difficult to balance the progressive position that's critical of the genocide with the traditional pro-Israeli voters who are interested in Israel's security and Israel's position. Nobody in the United States has really come out, nobody of significance has really come out with a position that says openly and clearly that the Israelis and the Palestinians are absolutely entitled to equal rights as individuals and as nations, as states. They have the same right to security, to dignity, to opportunity, to self-determination, to statehood, to sovereignty, and to security. Those rights are not negotiable for either side. Neither are they dependent on what the other side demands. So in the past, we haven't reached a peace agreement because the Israelis, with American deep support, have always said, look, we'll pull out of a few pieces of land in the West Bank, and the Palestinians can set up some local authority. And if they behave and they don't attack us and they do what we want them to do, maybe we'll give them more land and more rights in the future. That approach, which is the Kissinger approach that many other people applied in the State Department and in the administration, that's just not going to work anymore. And what we need is politicians who make statements, take positions that say that Israeli and Palestinian rights are absolutely equal and must be applied simultaneously. They're not sequential. Palestinian rights are not dependent on if Israel thinks that we're being good boys and girls. This is hard to do, but it's possible that a new coalition might emerge with progressive Jews middle-of-the-road politicians, the new uncommitted coalition with blacks and Hispanics and labor unions and churches, so many different groups. A new coalition might come out and say, look, we can support both sides. This is what happened in South Africa, that people said blacks need to have their full rights and the whites need to have their full rights as citizens, but not as managers of an apartheid racist state. And it worked. It took a long time, but it worked in the end. So I think we will see attempts to do this sometime, probably after the election, but maybe before, to create a larger American coalition of political leaders and citizens that says we want equal treatment of Israelis and Palestinians. No genocide, no apartheid, no resistance, no military resistance, no terrorism, no whatever you want to call it. We want equality between these two people because that's the only way to get a permanent resolution. And we know how a permanent resolution can be achieved from the dozens and dozens of negotiations that have taken place over the last 40 years, official and unofficial. But we've never had the clear, forceful, courageous, and honest leadership in the United States to push this forward. And it's only the United States that can help bring this about, because Israel only respects the United States and only trusts the United States in the international arena.